All right, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Welcome everybody to Zoom Big Book Study Workshop of the program of recovery laid out by the first 100 men and women. How we open this meetings with a bit of outside help. Looking at some of your faces today, probably the first time you prayed, so let's do it. What do we need for a good meeting? God. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So we're in We Agnostics, and what's interesting about We Agnostics is most people think they don't have to read it. Anybody been like that here? So I don't need to read We Agnostics, but We Agnostics has the basis to the whole foundation of what they mean by a power greater than themselves and their experience, how they navigated through their own thinking to make a beginning on this thing, right? Because most people at this stage of the game don't have a conflict with our understanding because they fully don't understand our understanding. They're having a conflict with their own understanding of a power greater than themselves and religious ideas, spiritual principles. Anybody? So when we start talking about spiritual principle, how many people start thinking about your thinking what it means? And thus the conflict, right? So, and it was the same like when Bill was talking with Ebby, right? Ebby was talking about his experience, but what was Bill doing? Thinking. He was in conflict with his own understanding of what was being presented, and he kind of got to a point where he seen it wasn't the same thing, right? Because Ebby was talking about an experience, Bill was talking about his thinking, right? Other people's ideas, what was imposed, his history with religion, right? Spiritual teachings and principles, and he was reflected back on different stuff like that, right? Did I say I'm an alcoholic? My name's Tony. Sobriety date's April 8, 1989. It's been a long week, man. So, working for a living. So if anybody has a donation of $1 million or more, I'll give you. Right. So I could do this full time. No, just okay. Who are you again?
Well, there's no challenge to our traditions there at all.
No. I mean, we're not saints, right?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Some of us are far from it.
Talking about far from it. Who are you?
I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name is Joanne. My sobriety date is August 24th, 2014.
Awesome. So last week we kind of looked at the summary of this thing, right? So if we kind of go to We Agnostics, it kind of talks about, in the preceding chapters, we've learned something of alcoholism. True? So it told us what the previous chapters were all about, was to learn about, right, alcoholism from their experience, their point of view, and their experience. Yes, based on the doctor's findings and stuff like that. So the idea of this thing started way back in the doctor's opinion. And the doctor also covered his observations on what these specific types of alcoholic needed in order to recover, that there were certain groups of people that his methods didn't work for. Remember that part? And so as we went along, we found out who those types of people were. It was the people who were afflicted with the malady that centers in the mind, that places one beyond human aid. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. People that were beyond his scope of helping. He's seen this, right? And which is really cool is that Bill, when he went there for the third time, he'd been there 4 times, but what's really important is the three experiences Bill had, right? The first time Bill went to treatment, what did he think the answer was? Not all at once. Let's relax here a bit. No. Self-knowledge, right? How many people thought that was the answer, self-knowledge? And we hear that all the time. Like, just apply self to self and you'll be okay. How many people tried that? How many people got a 24-hour chip for their efforts? Welcome back. So we start seeing that even within our fellowship, we're a little different than some people that seem to be staying sober no matter what. Then there's a group of people that seem to be getting drunk no matter what, right? So, and then you hear people say, we stay sober under any and all conditions. We seem to drink under any and all conditions. We don't even need a condition to drink, right? Our condition's a condition that needs a drink, right? So what's really cool, as they went through this, they explained previous steps 1 and 2 by the time we got to page 44. They outlined steps 1 and 2. How many people understand that now? Because they explained the problem, yes? Then they explained the solution, and each example they gave in regards to the solution is each one of them took a course of action to experience this thing that the doctor talked about as necessary in order for these people, these certain types of people, to recover. So we got the idea that these people had to have an entire psychic change if they were to recreate their lives, right? That their lives had to be grounded, their thinking or their lives had to be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they were to recreate that. So when he noticed that whole demonstration in Bill's life, because he kind of seen Bill as hopeless, right? So the third time Bill went into treatment, he already had a preconceived idea on the condition that it wasn't going to work for Bill coming back here again, but was open. But he witnessed Bill going through a course of action that his friend took him through, yes? And had this change that gave the doctor a totally different perspective of what this miracle we called Alcoholics Anonymous. Would you kind of agree to that?
Sure.
Sure. And then we seen in Bill's story, the first time he went to treatment, he thought self-knowledge. Then the second time the treatment, he was totally shit-kicked, right? So we seen he had acceptance. He had the gift of desperation. He was willing to do anything. Alcohol was his master. He did a total step one. But what was missing from Bill's life? A solution. There was no solution sufficient enough to bring about this change that the doctor talked about, right? So then the third time in treatment, what was the difference the third time in treatment compared to the first two times? He had his friend there to take him through a course of action that his friend talked to him as what we call a 12-step call. As he sat at the kitchen table, Bill was sitting there drinking. Ebby, who we now know, was talking about his experience. And as Ebby talked about his experience, Ebby also talked about the course of action he went through to obtain this thing. He came to pass on his experience to Bill, if he would have it, yes? So as he sat there and talked about this course of action, a couple of things started to happen. Bill's idea of miracles were revised right then and there, right? And through the demonstration of this thing, Bill seen it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than, nothing more was required. So all his understanding, all his belief was secondary. What was being presented. Are you willing to believe that there is something greater than yourself? And are you willing to do the course of action necessary to bring about this change? So that's all he's seen. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, he might build what he saw in his friend. So we understand that is kind of like step 3. I heard the problem. I heard the solution. I see it's possible for me to obtain it. And he confirmed that decision the third time going to treatment. Yes? Went through the course of action, and that's where I believe the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous started to happen and witnessed by the doctor. Yes? So as we went through this, we learned all the symptoms in regards to alcoholism. How many symptoms are there in regards to the illness of alcoholism? 2. So right away, it kind of takes care of a lot of that stuff we hear in the fellowship as it's a threefold illness. That's not our understanding. Right? It's 2, mental and physical. Right? The physical part's the allergy, we got that. And the interesting is the second symptom, they call it the malady. Why do they call it a malady? Because it's an unexplainable event that they try to explain based on their experience of having the characteristic of the symptom of the phenomenon that takes place in the thinking. Right? Thus placing us beyond human aid, or thus outright powerless over alcohol. Right? Because if you're the only one that don't know when you're going to drink again, how many people would say that would make your life unmanageable? That's right. So how many people try to get sober here and then celebrate it with a drink? So it kind of defeats everything, right? Anybody around you kind of shocked that you drank again? Right? Even you, right? That's why they call it baffled, right? And then after a while, right, as we see now what they mean by loss of choice, right? And so when we get to this point where they say, well, the only thing that that we need to obtain in order for us to recover is an entire psychic change of spiritual experience. Where do we get an outline of what they mean by that? You might as well answer it. No one else is listening to me.
Who has the answer to the question?
The question was, because right now, how many times have they asked you, what do you think? They haven't. So they're explaining everything, right? So have they explained step 1?
Yes.
Have they explained the solution to step one?
Yes.
Right? This is how you change their spiritual experience. That's means to obtain through a course of action, right?
So based on that information, ask the question again.
Where did we get the outline of what they mean by a psychic change or spiritual experience, what that looks like?
Where would we find the answer to that?
The appendix.
In Appendix 2, in the back of the book. It's not always on the same page, depending on what edition or abridged version you might have. But Appendix 2 in the back of the book expands on the spiritual experience, right? We went through a bit of that last week, where probably the best paragraph from Appendix 2 explains it. Like, how would we know, right, if somebody has had this experience or not, right? Do we know what the markers are? Do we know what the experience looks like in others?
Characteristics, right?
It says, quite often friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves.
So where's this resource being accessed? Within. Which is new information for us, right? Because a lot of us think it's something that we need to seek. How many people thought step 2 was the seeking? Now I got to go on a quest, right? So that's why when we read this is the purpose of this book is get you connected, that you can have your own experience.
In the beginning of Appendix 2, it says the terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in different forms. But they're very specific, right? That it's a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery, this entire psychic change, right? And then they describe it in the paragraph that I've just read. Nowhere in that information does it say, as soon as you have amassed enough fear about what happened the last time, you yourself will be able to create the change necessary to bring about recovery from alcoholism. Once you have amassed enough self-knowledge about your problem, you will be able to create the change sufficient enough to bring about recovery from alcoholism. So Bill went to treatment the first time, right? Gained enough self-knowledge, figured he knew and understood himself enough that he wouldn't pick up a drink.
All the triggers, anybody have that kind of, so we share the same experience, right?
The second trip to the treatment or Towns Hospital, same thing, right? He had enough fear, right? He had amassed enough fear that drinking was unthinkable, right?
Well, anybody else here have enough fear that no, I can't drink again. Like I can't drink again, right? So we see the founder had the same experience. Kind of weird how the characteristics seem to be common, right? The collective experience, right?
But then he's visited by his friend, right? So he's got some of step 1, right? He understands the allergy, right? And he's beginning to understand that he's going to continue to do this despite, like he's at a level of hopelessness. He's not even trying to stay sober at this point, right? So, with the information that Dr. Silkworth has provided him, with the information that Ebby brings to him, right? He gets armed with the proper facts about himself based on what the doctor has explained to him and what his friend has explained to him. But what his friend brings to him this time is a different explanation on a solution, right? He starts talking about access to power. He starts talking about how this power has brought about a change in his life, right? He starts sharing his experience. So what's the difference the third time?
God.
It's Ebby. Right? Back in, there's a solution where it says, I think it's page 18, isn't it? No.
25?
18. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Right? And it wasn't even really based on what Ebby was saying to Bill. It was more than just the words coming out of Ebby's mouth. There was an undeniable change about Ebby, right?
And the scary part is the same experience has to happen within the fellowship of AA. Just because you're in the fellowship of AA doesn't mean you're in the solution, right?
Amen.
Therefore, when we were approached by those with whom the problem had been solved, what step is that for those who are doing their approaching? Step 12. We carry this message. So that means when we're sitting in a fellowship meeting and we hear somebody who's struggling that doesn't understand alcoholism, we keep on them. We don't need their permission to keep on them, do we? They give consent by being here. Who cares if they like you? I don't care if they like you. If I know you're dying of alcoholism, how many people have seen me continuously say something to you? And how many times have I asked for your permission? Right?
Can you feel my eyes boring into the side of your head?
So all I know is when you see, how many people, come on, when you see me approaching you and went, oh shit. Oh no, here he comes again, right? Why is he so interested in me? Because I know something about you you don't know yet. I know something about you that you don't know yet. I've listened to how you share and the characteristics of what you're sharing, the symptoms that you're exhibiting, and then I hear you share, and I think you're in deep shit and you don't know it. Right? And so what I do is I start chipping away at you, right? I start disturbing you. Right? How many people is left here thinking, what an asshole? Put your hands down, put your hands down, put your hands down. But see, that's the whole goal, right? Is that you left the meeting thinking about somebody other than you, which is a miracle in itself. Right? And even maybe ask questions. Like, what did that guy mean? Why? Like, because a lot of us come here early and we get comforted and it doesn't do nothing for us. Right? So
in that conversation, sorry, were you going to go somewhere else? In There's a Solution?
No, so what happens is when we approach you, we offer you not only explain the problem, we start explaining the solution. Right? And maybe you don't know what you're talking about, then we offer you to take you through a course of action. That's why we get together here. How many people say, hey, these guys Thursday night, they go through a process that we don't like, but they seem to do really well for people like you, right? And otherwise, they'd invite you to a 12 and 12 study, right? Because it's important, because 12 and 12 study works for a lot of people, but they don't work for people of our description. 12 and 12 is meant to be read after you've done this, not before. But the fellowship has changed that, where they offer you the 12 and 12 first. And it works for a lot of people who, depending where they are in the scale of alcoholism, but it's never worked for an alcoholic of our description. Would you think that's important to know?
Yeah.
Right? And what you're doing is talking about Bill's experience. Can you have Bill's experience without doing what he did to get it? Would you think that would be important to know? Mm-hmm. And that's that stuff. So I don't have a problem with the 12 and 12. What I have a problem with is people offering that as a solution before they offer the design of Alcoholics Anonymous. 12 and 12 is a great read, right? The traditions are in there. It's actually a really good, it was designed for a specific purpose, but not to help people to recover from alcoholism. That's not the design of it. And if more people knew that, if you knew that it really wouldn't give you the solution to alcoholism, and then there was a big book study in the 12 and 12, and you knew the big book was designed to allow you to have this experience to recover from this thing, would you be more... So that's part of our job too, right, is to inform and comfort. Like those of us who are responsible is to lay out the design of Alcoholics Anonymous. So here's a couple questions. So once you've had this change... right? The psychic change of spiritual experience as the result, not a result, as the result of going through this course of action. You've had this change that we just read about. Are you still dealing with alcoholism?
You're not.
So do you still have an alcoholic mind?
Yes.
No. If you still had an alcoholic mind, you would drink again.
Let me show you where it says this in the book, right?
Yeah.
Because whenever we challenge something that we think we know, right, and we're shocked that what comes out of Tony's mouth is not matching with what we think and believe.
Which is a lot. Oh, sorry.
We want to get into the practice because your life depends on this thing, right? So it's incredibly important that you don't just listen to somebody who sounds good and go, okay, that must be fact, right? Get in the habit of listening to what somebody says, and when you find it profound, ask them where it says that in our program of recovery, right? So on page 100, it says, assuming we are spiritually fit, right? Assuming we are spiritually fit, we can do all sorts of things alcoholics are not supposed to do. People have said we must not go where liquor is served. We must not have it in our homes. We must shun friends who drink. We must avoid moving pictures which show drinking scenes. We must not go into bars. Our friends must hide their bottles and blah, 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 blah. We mustn't think or be reminded about alcohol at all. Our experience shows that this is not necessarily so. We meet these conditions every day. An alcoholic who cannot meet them still has an alcoholic mind. There is something the matter with his spiritual status. His only chance for sobriety would be someplace like the Greenland ice cap, and even there an Eskimo might turn up with a bottle of scotch and ruin everything. Ask any woman who has sent her husband to distant places on the theory he would escape the alcohol problem. In our belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to failure.
And that goes right into page 25. So what we're doing is exactly how the book's laid out. What we're doing is what was done with us. The exact same process. When you get to working with others, it's really weird. They'll tell you to do the exact same process that was done with you. Carry this message. So when they go into the outlay of this thing that they call a solution, they always, so far up to page 44, they always say, sold on the ideas contained in this book, right? Did this course of action in this book. They talked about all our members have tapped into an inner resource that they got access through this book, yes? So they always talk about a course of action. They don't talk about it just happening by osmosis, right? So on page 25, they said there is a solution.
Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. Did you notice there how it said leveling of pride?
Yeah.
Just checking.
Just checking.
But we...
Remember, I was setting up tables and putting on coffee pots while you're still... I was waiting for you, so it's okay. Go ahead.
You were still doing that last Saturday. You were still doing that.
I was
last
still
Saturday.
setting up
Yes,
tables
you
and
were.
chairs
Yeah,
last
you were.
Saturday. That's right. Okay.
But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved.
Okay, hold it for a second. The problem had been solved. So is the problem still there?
No.
What's the problem that we suffer from that doesn't allow us to fulfill the life that we're hoping on?
What's our real problem?
Lack of power.
Lack of power?
But the condition of the mind. That gives the malady that gives us an alcoholic.
Because the question was, right? Does this person still, do we still have an alcoholic mind? Once we've gone through this process and had this experience and this entire psychic change, do we still have an alcoholic mind? That was the question, right?
So, get people like me, I couldn't stay sober. My last relapse was 360 meetings in 90 days after 11 years of in and out. 4 12 and 12 studies a week. Like 360 meetings plus is a lot of meetings. Hour after the meeting, I was drinking again. When I was getting my chip, I was never drinking again. I didn't understand the malady. So, I don't know when the malady comes back. That's why they call it a phenomenon. It's an event that takes place within inside of me that it creates a change that I can't see happening, but I find myself drinking again. Anybody been there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Then after, it's like, holy shit, I'm baffled. So as long as this condition's present, what's the likelihood of longevity? Zipola. So, I got taken through this course of action. Somewhere from the day I got that chip and started this course of action, the problem got removed. How do you know the problems got removed? Because I just took a 35-year cake. It hasn't come back. Right? So far, so good. Right? Right? So far, so good. But what allows that is what we're doing here, right? So my sobriety is a byproduct of this course of action that connected me to something greater than me that I had a personal experience with that I developed. It's a part of my life. It's a very part of me. Because if I don't maintain this recipe, I don't know when it comes back again. It's a suddenly, this thing. So I don't know when it comes back again. I don't know when it's left, but I know through this course of action that I've experienced the same thing as those that put this thing together. That's what we're reading here. How did I experience? Through a course of action. Without this course of action, I still have an alcoholic mind. The problem is we think we can see an alcoholic mind because we're mistaken irritable, restless, and discontent and behavioral problem, the human condition, as alcoholism. They're two different things, right? So I'm still left with the human component that I apply spiritual principles to that give me a sense of ease and comfort. It gives me the ability, regardless of what's happening in my life, I'm able to find safe harbor within inside of me, that inner resource that allows me to reconnect and see life differently and move ahead with solution-based. Did I bring that about? Bill talks about the same thing, right? After he left the treatment the third time, he had a different group of principles that he put into practice regardless of his thinking. He was full of depression, resentments, amends. Like he was having a hard time with his life. But when all else failed, when he did this recipe, he got connected and it allowed him to go past where he was never able to go past before. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Okay.
You want to go back to We Agnostics?
Yes.
Okay. So on page 44, in the first paragraph, this is a sort of, we can turn this into a set of questions, but it sort of mirrors like what we were talking about in Bill's story, right? If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, right? That being the malady. Or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic, right? That being the allergy. And Bill already had information about those two symptoms, right? It was Ebby that was able to sort of bring this next part of the conversation into play. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Because up until that point, what kind of solution had Bill been trying to apply to the problem? Himself, right?
Anybody try to apply self to self here and think you're doing good and celebrate it with another 24-hour chip?
So, do they get into specifics as to why self doesn't work?
Yes.
Sure they do. Yeah, it says down here at the bottom of the page, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago.
This is interesting. Are they still talking about alcoholism? No. Now they're talking about the human condition, the thinking process that we trip over and stumble, that block us off from pursuing the very thing that we need to save our life. But we can't get past our own thinking. I know none of you fine folks have ever had that problem. But from here on out, they're going to talk about the struggles we have in our thinking. They had the same struggles and how to navigate through that and find the bare minimum requirement to pursue this thing. So what that kind of means is I need to find a way to sidestep my own thinking to come up with anybody look up that word conception? A new game plan and idea, right? The conception, you can choose your own conception of what this game plan means in this idea. What we're getting is we need to achieve this, right? Here's the course of action that they have. They're giving us a new idea and a course of action, yes? New conception and a plan of attack. But what's interfering with that? It's the first thing that said good morning to you. You. Anybody still plagued with it? But we don't know we're plagued with our own thinking because that's all we have is our own thinking. We're used to the neighborhood. Now they're going to say, well, let's look at your thinking.
How many people here have created a change in their life? How many of you are surprised when it's not long lasting? Right? You notice in the spirit in the appendix 2 in the spiritual experience, they use the language a change sufficient enough to bring about recovery from alcoholism, right? And it was interesting to me. It's like I've created change in other areas of my life. I've created change that felt like maybe something had shifted and something was different, but then I found it was short-lived. And the idea that lack of power was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously, but where and how were we to find this power?
Why do we need to find this power? What's the bottom line, the basis of the necessity to get access to this power?
I just gave you the answer.
It's our dilemma.
It's
To
the,
create a psychic change.
it's the power that creates the change, right? It's the power that creates a change sufficient enough to bring about recovery. Make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we're moving from 1-ply toilet paper to 3-ply. Totally different experience.
Why
Okay.
does everything have to do
Go
with
ahead,
shit?
sorry. Because that's what you're going to be in if you don't get this thing.
It's all...
You're going to be in a lot of shit.
So what's
Okay, so go
what's
ahead.
this book about? What's this book about now? Is it about alcoholism now? It's about no. It's not even access to power. It's a set of instructions that will enable you to find a power greater than yourself. Right?
Based on whose experience?
There's 100 men and women.
And all those that went before us. Remember how they started this? The story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. They all have the same story. Why? Because they're afflicted with the same illness. They all believed in the same solution being presented and took the same course of action. Right? We have a way out which we can absolutely agree. What's the way out that we can absolutely agree? Is we got access to power that allowed us to have this change. Right? So let's go.
You want me to go through 45 or you want to skip to 47?
let's go over to page 46.
Okay.
This is kind of, so your job is to read through this. We're going to hit some highlights, right? So yes,
We of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results.
so I didn't know what prejudice meant was my ideas and my arguments around this thing, because I came in this thing with a pretty traumatic background around religious and spiritual ideas, right? But I didn't know they were so deep seated that I thought this thing was not obtainable, because I had my idea what it looked like, and that was based on church doctrine. Right? Like some of you know the story. When I was like 12, I was in a street guy called the Demons, right, in Toronto, and we had like broken swastikas and crosses on our upside. Like it was so, which is okay for us. But when I went to visit my family, there was a movement back in the Roman Catholic Church back then. They were going charismatic, right? So imagine me showing up with a shoulder length afro. Right, smoking dope, right, with this jean jacket with demons across the back for evangelical family. Yeah, so they took me to this event. I won't get into the whole thing of it. They took me to this event, and it was pretty traumatic what happened, and I won't get into it. It was mind-boggling, and then they said they didn't do a good enough job, so they had a private event for me they thought I was demonically possessed. That's what it was. And so it was an exorcism that they felt that I had to undergo in order to save my life. Then they said if I don't maintain this thing, I'm going to be even more demonically possessed. So I wasn't able to maintain it. So part of me thought, I cannot afford to have this anymore because I can't afford to get any worse because I can't maintain it. I don't know if that kind of makes any sense. But that was a preconceived idea and prejudice. Your way is not going to work for me because I need to have another exorcism. May sound crazy, but that's like me and God are never going to meet, right? So this is what my ideas were stopping me from moving forward. And everybody else's teachings and their ideas and their interpretation of spiritual principles. So I was hooped right from the beginning.
Let's just be absolutely clear, there are no exorcisms coming, okay?
One more.
Well, it's everybody has it, though. Everybody has a formal argument. How many people don't have a formal argument in their brain that somebody else taught you, or your ideas what this stuff means.
Yeah, I was very grounded in the idea that in a world full of shitty things happening to good people constantly, right? How could there possibly be a God?
Yeah, nothing happens in God's world by mistake, so God did this all to me.
No, I had no belief in one, right? It wasn't a matter of blaming something. It just didn't
No,
exist
that was
to
mine.
me. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. So, I mean, these are the kinds of prejudice we come forward in, right?
So we got two of us, her experience, my experience, and now you're presenting this stuff. How well do you think we're going to do with that kind of thinking?
I'm on my way to the secular meeting. That's where I'm going, right? Because that's where my my prejudice is going to take me.
And I'm going back to the Pentecostal church because that's where my thinkers take you. So see, both of our thinking has now talked us out of this thing, and we're going our own way.
We may seem to have a different problem, right? But we actually have the same problem because what's happening?
Our thinking is causing stumbling blocks to not move forward to what's being presented.
And we actually have the same problem, right? Because whatever our belief system, it's not working, right? Lack of belief, belief warped by religious trauma. Do you understand what it is that I mean? And this whole chapter is designed to help us understand the idea behind a concept, power greater than ourselves, right? And if we're jammed in on our own thinking, it's because we are trying to align it with somebody else's idea, not their idea.
So this is where good sponsorship comes in and says, keep reading and see what this is about. See what their understanding is of the bare minimum, right, of what's being asked, and how can you sidestep your thinking to kind of obtain what's being offered. Does that kind of make sense? So I need to find a new way of looking at something because my way is not. So if your life is on the line, how many people would be more open to what's being suggested if you're going to die an alcoholic death? Okay, I'm open to what you're seeing here. Like, okay, I'm open to what you got to say. Let's see what you got to say because I know I'm going to die, so you got my attention. And if this seems to be working for you crazy people, I've heard you. Can't be that hard. Right?
It's interesting because they don't even make very difficult work of it, right? Which is what makes the chapter so beneficial to whatever your belief system might be. Because on page 47, it says we needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe that there is a power, right? It doesn't ask me, am I willing to believe in God? Does it ask me, am I willing to believe in somebody else's idea? It doesn't even ask me about a particular religious idea, right?
Well, we need to back up a bit, much to our relief. This is important, right? It sets up the idea of what's the minimum being asked of us to make a beginning.
Because I was going to get there.
If this book, oh wait, because you went to 47.
Yeah, but
sorry.
I was going to go back to 46.
Okay. sorry, Yvonne. That's my wife's name. Go ahead.
We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? So now I understand that they're not asking me a specific question about God, right? But what is it that they mean by this power? They expand in the spiritual experience, right? What that experience might look like. It might be educational in variety for some. It might be sudden and overwhelming for others. But what is their description of this power? And back on 46, it says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. What a relief that brings, right? So if I'm over here in all of my atheists' belief system, I am actually considering another person's conception of God because that's what the resistance is about, right? I don't want to wrap my head around a guy on a cloud keeping track of all of my activities, deciding whether I get to take the down escalator or the up escalator at the end of my life, right? I didn't like that idea. And that's kind of what religion spelled out to me. I don't mean to be offensive to anybody who's religious, but that's the mindset I was in. Tony's experience is based in a bit of religious trauma, right? But we don't need to consider those ideas. That's what they're saying.
And so earlier, it says, whatever my religious beliefs are, it's none of your business. right? It's not of your concern. So what's really cool is when I was 12-stepping Joanne, I wasn't selling her my ideas and my belief system. I'm a true believer, right? I've been baptized, I renewed like everything's good. I hardly ever talk about it, right? But I am like 100% true believer.
And I had absolutely no idea, which is exactly the way that it should be, right?
What was I passing on was, this is how I got access to power. This is what changed my life. And this is what I've built on. So my road took me, and it takes us all the same way. Developing the wording and how I pursue that is secondary. But the first part is, this is the basis of it that we all agree on. So here the wording, they use all these different words. That's why they don't go, make up your own God or make up your own ideas. It says choose your own conception. Conception of what? Of what's being presented and how I can pursue this thing. Conception. Formulating a game plan sufficient enough to bring about what's being offered.
So you actually 12-stepped me in a way that was a beautiful example of this next principle. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. So Tony approached me and didn't say, come up with your own ideas. He said, have you ever used a radio? Yeah? So you know that one radio can communicate with a tower and other radios by way of a signal, right? A frequency. You can't see that frequency, right? You can't touch that frequency, right? But you see the effects of it coming through the radio. You experience the effects of it coming through the radio. And what if this power exists like a frequency among us? And that was something I could buy into right away, right? It wasn't too far removed from this power greater than ourselves, right? But it was something that helped me join in on the singular idea of a power greater than ourselves.
Transmission and reception. Right? Like, pretty wild. So this is really wild where they talk about, we need to ask ourselves but one short question.
Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? So now we started with that question, we went back to the explanation, and we're coming back to that question, right? And now we have a different point of view at it.
So, because the bottom line is, when I need a formula, is there something greater than me that I may get access to that all these people are talking about as the basis of the change in their life? The spiritual appendix says all our members, not some of our members, all our members have tapped into an inner resource of strength. Our more religious members identified as a God consciousness. The wording is secondary, right? But the connection, this experience, is singular. Pretty wild, right? We have a way out which we could all agree on. It's like with the cell phones. How many people have, I don't know what kind of cell phones you have, but does everybody know how to access their phone to call out? And even when you don't have a plan, you could still get 911. You could still get help.
You can still make an SOS call.
Yeah. And that's where we're at with this thing. We know you have no data plan, but we're going to hook you up with 911. We're going to give you the help you need, right? Just dial the number.
Occasionally, we'll even share some of our data with you. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. It's interesting, right? Like when we come at it with that language, it's not asking us to buy into anything that's going to come up against our own morals or principles that we might already have. There's not a lot of resistance to it because it's not presenting us with anything to resist.
So, willingness is foundation. Believing is the cornerstone. You know what a cornerstone is? It sets up the building, right? How accurate a cornerstone. And then later, step 3 is the keystone, right? So when they talk about, I asked the guy, what do you mean by spiritual structure can be built? He says, this is where they explain it to me. It makes perfectly good sense. When I'm connected, I seem to be in a different energy field within my own experience. when I'm connected. Anybody? You feel like you just notice more, you're more connected. You think about somebody, they call you, right? Anybody got that? There's something happening, right? And you're in despair, the phone rings, somebody show up, you're in a meeting, like how you got from there to here, there's something happening, right?
Very true.
So the spiritual structure is, this. I believe this is my experience, where I move from a Neanderthal instinct-based thinking to an energy-based life. I'm governed by something in here that illuminates my life. I don't know how to explain that. I'm not living up here anymore. I'm not instinct-based. Right? I'm kind of connected. Have a better frequent connection with people, places, and things. I seem to be governed a little different, inwardly rearranged.
I can't imagine you being a Neanderthal.
Yeah. you got to see me in the right moments.
Well, I'm also never sarcastic.
No.
Do you want to skip ahead
So
to
yeah,
52?
So we talk, which is really interesting here, on page 50. So they talk on one proposition.
However, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself.
How did they get access to this power? How did every single one of them get access to this power?
By going through the course of action.
By going through the course of action. You don't get that in step 2. Step 2 is the formula to get access to this thing. Step 2 is what we read on page 25. It's the course of action. Most people talk about their relationship with God in step 2. That's not what step 2 is about. Step 2 is the solution to step 1. That brings us. So the confirmation of step 1 is having another drink. That's the step 1 problem. Yes? It's inevitable that you're going to drink again if you're afflicted with these symptoms. Yes? In the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. Step 2 is the solution that the person who's afflicted with this illness needs to obtain a psychic change or spiritual experience if they're going to recreate their lives. How did they get that? They all went through a course of action. So the confirmation of step 2 of the idea being presented in step 2 is what? Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And then this idea that we're going to get into about this relationship that's possible that we could have with this power, right, this connection, right, is an idea being presented here, this spiritual structure that we could obtain is step 3. Yes, I want to pursue this relationship, get access to this power that creates the change that we read about in the spiritual appendix, and all our members have talked about, and the people who are working with us talked about, or we're talking about. What's the confirmation of that relationship is step 11. So when you hear people say, I do steps 1, 2, and 3 every day, well, it really does nothing, right? The whole thing is about getting to a relationship in 11 that I could reconstruct my life with, that I'm not totally dependent on me. I seek counsel with this power, and then I'm of service to people, to God and the people around me. That's why we're sitting here doing what we're doing, right? So we're living really in 12, but 11's the basis of our life.
It says here, this power in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declared that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things.
What are the certain simple things? The rest of the steps. Because this is not about obtaining anything. This is about the idea I need to pursue something. I need to pursue this to get it. Because if you can get it in step 2, how many people would do it in how many people would do step 3? That's where you hear people, the 9-step promises. They're not the 9-step promises. They're read in step 9, right? They're a result of the whole course of action, the application of these principles to bring about this change.
Well, it says here to do certain things, simple things. There has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. This is what we were explaining earlier, is this a whole shift and change in our reaction to life, right? We can't have a sustained change in our reaction to life if nothing has changed in our thinking, right? If nothing has shifted internally, then it's eventually going to show up. You can only fake that for so long. It's not real, right?
You hear people say, I just had to change one thing, everything. If you're capable of changing anything, you wouldn't need to do this. Right?
Yep.
You hear people say, no major decisions in your first year. This is a major decision. Right? Is this not a major decision? It's like spiritual help or alcoholic death. How long do I get to decide? We're the only group of people that would think that, let me think, spiritual death, alcoholic death or spiritual help. How long do I get to decide?
I was such a smartass when I got here. I wish I would have thought of that. I'm like, well, I'm not allowed to make any serious decisions in the first 12 months. But
So page 52.
well, hang on.
Go ahead.
In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction flowed into them, right? If this is not what's being experienced, right, has this person had this entire psychic change or spiritual experience, right? This is common language to the appendix in the back of the book, right? This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. What are those requirements again? The course of action, right? Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life.
So this is the precursor to step 3. It's an introduction to step 3. We've done steps 1 and 2. Now it's getting us ready to navigate through our thinking to start this course of action, right? Which is step 3. So it's preparing me to be comfortable with the decision I'm making to pursue this course of action. Because where am I at now is I need to get ready to do this course of action. But if my thinking's blocking me from doing that, I need to find a way to navigate through that to start this course of action. Because it's the course of action that creates the change, not my position where I am now. Where I am now is how do I find a place that I'm okay to move forward to obtain this power that these people are talking about, that I read about in the spiritual appendix, that the book is referred to, right? How do I get to a place of doing the work that they're suggesting to have my own experience?
It says, leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives. They present a powerful reason why one should have faith.
So the interchangeable, power, God, right? You should be okay with either word now, because we're laying aside prejudice, meaning access, whether it's Apple phone or Samsung. Oh, you got a Samsung, oh, it doesn't work. Yeah, it still works. It doesn't matter what you call it, right? God, power, it's the same thing, right? Because if you're having a hard time with the idea of God right now, you'd have the hard time if we called it a peanut butter and jam sandwich. It's not gluten-free. I don't know if I could eat that. So you're going to starve to death. Is that what you're saying? That's what it's getting, like that kind of thing. So you're starving to death. We're offering you a sandwich because it's not gluten-free. You're not going to eat it? That's between what's left of eating that sandwich or dying. Oh, let's see how long I can go. Okay.
It's like the life raft analogy.
Okay.
Are we okay to go to 52?
Yep.
We had?
Yeah, 52.
We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view.
Okay, you notice it didn't say apply to alcoholism? They stopped talking about that. Now they're getting into what our biggest challenges are going to be from here forward. Lack of power, our thinking, and the application of this thing in our lives. Right? So our biggest dilemma now is finding a solution to our problems, which is our human condition. What did we used to use as a solution to our human condition? Alcohol. Anybody? How many people, when they had a problem, take a drink and that problem went away? How many people used to feel the promises when they took? You intuitively knew how to handle situations that used to baffle you. Right? Right? You see how your experience can benefit everybody, whether they're asking or not. So it's true, though, right? That we used to use, and then as most people were progressing in their life, we started digressing, and so we get sober. Anybody notice when you get sober, there's a shit pile of problems?
few.
Just it's like, holy shit, how am I going to? And all those problems are all internal, right? And so why we go through this on the level we do is because when we get to the promises are all internal, not external. Most people talk about the promises being external. They don't understand this process yet. Go ahead.
So let's have a look at our human condition in present form. We were having trouble with personal relationships. Check. We couldn't control our emotional natures. Check. We were a prey to misery and depression. Well, yeah, check.
Every now and then.
We couldn't make a living.
Right.
We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight?
So
Of course it was.
So when people say, oh, the doctor's opinion, say irritable, restless, and that's alcohol. That's not alcoholism. That's the human condition without a solution.
All of these things that I've just described right out of the book, right? Are these isolated to alcoholics? No, this is a description of every human being you'll come in contact with in your life, right? To varying degrees, right? People have trouble in their personal relationships. They have difficulty making a living depending on how bad their human condition is, right? Over on page 53, it says, when we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be?
So this is interesting because they say the question mark is they're going to explain what they mean by that. Right? They're not shanghaiing you now, saying, okay, what's your decision? They're saying, that's what we think it is. But they're going to explain the human condition in our thinking that we're already living by a lot of the principles that we're going to talk about. Our belief system, how we see things, our life is a direct result of everything we believe and feel. Right? Our belief system, the things we value, the things we hold true, right? And these things aren't working for us. So imagine if you were to take that same energy and apply it along spiritual lines with new conceptions and new ideas. That's what they talk about on page 54.
Take that same energy, right, that's got you exhausted from trying to solve all of these human problems and apply it to a spiritual relationship instead. Did you catch what he just said? Because that's we're a fellowship of people who were like, yes, I have a relationship with God, except I'm trying to solve all my problems.
So we're going to finish this chapter out, but read this page. It's quite interesting. It said, did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence?
It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else.
So you're some result of everything you believe, value, and feel. Your life, the way it looks right now, you created it.
Because prior to that, they say, did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence?
All your relationships with people, places, and things, you're the center of that. Does that give you a warm, fuzzy feeling?
So what they're saying is that these are not the sum result of our external experiences, right? Something internal is creating the way we experience our own existence.
So we're going to give you the secret to this whole thing, page 55. And we'll finish with this. Actually,
we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God.
This power.
It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts, as old as man himself.
That sixth sense, it's always been there. That feeling of hope, that feeling there's something better for you, that thing that talks to you. What are you doing? Anybody have that voice? What are you doing?
We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found.
How many people would go looking? You got to go find God. How many people would look within? I never got. So that's what they're saying. This thing is deep down within. You've always had access to it. It's been there without your acknowledgement of it. And we're going to cultivate. We're going to build on this thing. That's where?
Inside of you.
Deep down within, the receiver, the connection to the universal, right?
The next set of principles we're going to learn about is this are surrounded around this statement, it may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, and by worship of other things. Because if it's always been deep down within me and it's been with me my whole entire life, how come I didn't know? How come I couldn't access it? Right? Something has been blocking it. It's interesting what the next step will reveal about that.
So here's the exercise this week. Ready? How many people want to know if they've had this entity, this power, this life force within you all along? Here's the exercise. This week, go back over your life and think about every time something deep down within you has tried to get your attention or try to talk to you or say, don't do this, where you got total fear, somebody offered you a bit of hope, and your demeanor changed. Anybody ever feel that? Energy changed within inside? It's always been there. Anybody have that voice? Don't do that? Or phone? So right back, how many, like I remember this one time, it may sound kind of weird. I was so loaded, I don't know how I got home or what happened. And I came to in my basement, and this little voice, it was clear. It said, don't fall asleep on your back. That's all I remember. So I turned over on my stomach, and I woke up in the morning. There was vomit on one side. If I would have fell asleep on my back, I would have died of an asphyxiation. Where did that voice come from? That's that life force that we're going to tap into that moves us forward. We have a 7th tradition. We're self-supporting through our own contributions.
Those contributions help pay for rent, the books, the worksheets. So if you're in a position to contribute, please do so. You're not under no obligation to do so, though. Thank you.
So what are we going to seek? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Live long and prosperous. May the force be with you. We have the worksheets over there. We have a basket. If you need worksheets or a book, grab one.